HOA Karen blocks. My pool freezes when Navy SEALs dive in to swim. Welcome, everyone, to a tale so unexpected and gripping that you'll find yourself leaning forward in anticipation from the very first sentence. We're about to plunge into a seemingly ordinary neighborhood where homeowners associations wield surprising power. At its center stands a determined resident, label her a Karen if you must, who believes she owns not just her property, but the entire community pool. Little does she know, a group of Navy SEALs, fresh from training at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, is about to surface and turn her world upside down. Secrets unfold, tensions explode, and loyalties shatter in this twisty journey toward rightful and astonishing karmic retribution. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. I first became aware of trouble brewing the moment I spotted Karen stomping across the manicured lawn at precisely 6:57 a.m. on a Monday morning. She was wearing her signature pastel pink jogging suit, and her hair was pulled into a ponytail that bobbed up and down, telegraphing her agitation. I was just returning from an early grocery run at Costco, still groggy from too little sleep. Without missing a beat, Karen marched straight up to me, phone in hand, snapping photos of my car, the community lawn, and the pool gate. She shot me a glare so intense I almost dropped my bags. I'd been living in the neighborhood for only a few months, long enough to know about the Homeowners Association's reputation, short enough to be mostly oblivious to the intricacies of local drama. But one thing was impossible to ignore. Karen, the self-appointed guardian of all rules, seemed out for blood that morning. She muttered something about you newcomers and pool usage violations, but I couldn't decipher most of it through her clipped speech and the hum of passing traffic. Later that day, I popped down to the pool area to catch some mid-afternoon sun. The neighborhood's pool wasn't massive, but it was well kept, surrounded by carefully trimmed hedges, a couple of lounge chairs, and a single, lonely palm tree that gave off a faint whisper in the breeze. I just spread out a towel on one of the lounge chairs when I heard the unmistakable sound of Karen clearing her throat. She was standing at the pool gate, arms akimbo, sunglasses perched dramatically on the end of her nose. "Good afternoon," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Inside, I felt a prickle of apprehension. She didn't even bother with polite greetings, launching straight into a tirade about unauthorized guests in the pool, leftover trash, and liability concerns. I wasn't sure how to respond. It seemed she was accusing me of infractions I'd never committed. She didn't pause long enough for me to clarify or defend myself. The tension was thick, and her gaze was laser-focused on me, as though I was the #1 suspect in a crime spree. I attempted to politely ask what I had done wrong, but Karen completely ignored my question. Instead, she produced a clipboard from her oversized tote bag and dramatically flipped through pages of typed notes. Lines were highlighted, margins scribbled, paper clips rattling. "Rule 7B, she said. No glass containers in the pool area. I pointed to my plastic water bottle. Rule 2F, she went on, ignoring me. No more than 2 guests per household. I told her I had come alone and had invited no one. Karen merely glowered. It was as if her entire worldview didn't require factual basis. Her convictions were enough to condemn me. I realized then that this was not just about me. She was on a mission to tighten her grip on the neighborhood, determined to single-handedly enforce every single HOA guideline she could recall. Something inside me churned. There was a strange mix of anger and bewilderment. Here I was, enjoying a quiet afternoon, and suddenly I found myself under scrutiny. I hadn't asked for, and definitely didn't deserve. A few days passed without incident. I tried to brush off Karen's bizarre behavior, chalking it up to a misunderstanding. The neighbor next door, Terry, who had lived here longer, clued me in. She's always prowling around, Terry said, shaking his head. They call her the HOA hawk. Anyone steps out of line, she swoops down. He described how she once issued a violation notice to an elderly couple for leaving their trash cans out by the curb for an extra 30 minutes. Another time, she'd threatened to fine a family for having a swing set that was apparently not in compliance with the approved color scheme. That was enough to make me watch my back. I double-checked my own trash cans, made sure my porch light matched the HOA's official color chart, and otherwise went about my life trying to lie low. In my mind, Karen's theatrics were best avoided. The less confrontation, the better. Yet I had a nagging feeling that her next outburst would be bigger, bolder, and somehow far more personal. My intuition told me trouble was only just warming up. My uneasy premonition proved correct the following Saturday. My cousin Jason, a recently retired Navy SEAL, was in town for a brief visit. He brought along two close friends, also retired from service guys, who trained with him at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. They all were quick to smile and had an easygoing vibe despite their formidable skill sets. The plan was simple. They wanted to relax poolside and maybe take a swim after a grueling cross-country road trip. We arrived at the pool in the late afternoon. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows on the water. My cousin and his friends tossed their towels onto the chairs, joked around, and prepared to dive in. I was already anticipating the distinct possibility that Karen might show up, but I pushed the thought aside. After all, the pool was open to residents and their guests, and I was a resident in good standing. Nothing illegal, nothing suspicious. It should be fine, right? No sooner had Jason's friend Manny eased into the water than we heard the unmistakable ring of Karen's voice echoing across the pool deck. She burst through the gate as if on a mission from the heavens, clutching that same clipboard and wearing a bright orange visor. In a clip tone, she demanded to see proof that these were registered guests. The awkwardness was immediate. Jason, Manny, and their fellow SEAL buddy, Vince, exchanged puzzled glances. Manny was half in the water, arms resting on the pool's edge. Karen repeated her question, making it sound more like an accusation. My heart sank. I felt that surge of anxiety. Again, her presence seemed to suffocate the sense of ease. I calmly explained that these men were my guests, which was allowed by HOA rules, and that they had every right to use the pool. Karen's expression hardened. She claimed that I was limited to 2 guests total, ignoring the fact that the official guidelines permitted up to 4. She then pivoted to a brand new complaint. The men hadn't showered before entering the pool. Manny, a stickler for cleanliness, calmly explained he'd done exactly that, using the outdoor shower to rinse off, but Karen dismissed his words with a sneer. She circled around the pool like a shark in the shallows, making notes on her clipboard. Her disapproving clicks of the pen might as well have been cannon fire. Jason's eyes narrowed, and I recognized that subtle tension in his posture, a readiness that came from years of high-pressure training. Nobody wanted a confrontation, but Karen was pushing every button. Sensing the tension, Vince tried to diffuse the situation with humor. "MAAM," he said, giving a half salute. "I promise we're not here to cause trouble. We were just hoping for a quiet swim." Karen didn't even flinch. Her gaze shifted between the 3 men, suspicion etched across her features. Then came a flurry of baseless accusations. Maybe they had alcohol in their cooler, or glass bottles, or they were disturbing the peace. One after another, she rattled them off. Suddenly, she held out her phone and declared she was calling the police. My breath caught. Could she really escalate it that far over a simple swim? It was a shocking move, and her obvious enjoyment at the idea of flexing authority chilled the air around us. The men looked at each other, then at me, confusion in their eyes. This was crossing the line from petty enforcement into something altogether more malicious. In that moment, Manny decided enough was enough. He pulled himself out of the pool, water dripping off his broad shoulders. Standing next to Karen's rigid frame, he calmly offered to show her his ID, explaining that he was a former Navy SEAL and that he and his friends were simply visiting me, a resident. The mention of Navy SEAL seemed to freeze Karen for a split second. A flicker of recognition, maybe intimidation, danced across her face. But just as quickly, she doubled down. "Oh, sure," she sneered. "Anyone can claim that. Doesn't make you special." Then she turned on her heel and started punching in numbers on her phone, presumably contacting the local police station. Tension vibrated through the air. My mind whirled. This was insane. A quiet day at the pool was erupting into a standoff. My pulse pounded with dread, uncertain how far she would push this confrontation. The next 10 minutes were downright surreal. Karen alternated between shouting into her phone and giving us death stares. Her exact words were hard to hear, but phrases like trespassing, unauthorized, and threatening men surfaced. I saw Manny clench his jaw. Jason paced around, trying to keep calm. Vince, the most soft-spoken among them, rubbed a hand over his face as though he couldn't believe this was happening. A handful of neighbors gathered near the fence, drawn by Karen's raised voice. Some recognized the men from earlier introductions or casual greetings around the block, but none dared confront Karen directly. It was as if she had an iron grip on the entire place, a reign of pettiness that everyone simply endured. Fear of retribution from the HOA was enough to keep them silent. Within minutes, 2 squad cars rolled up to the parking lot. Lights flashed, but no sirens. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter and appearing more cautious. Karen immediately motioned them over, pointing at us in a dramatic, sweeping gesture. My heart thudded. This was truly happening. We were about to be confronted by law enforcement because of an unhinged HOA dispute. Jason, Manny, and Vince moved to the side, adopting a posture that was simultaneously non-threatening yet ready to explain themselves. They dealt with far more high-stakes encounters in their military careers, but I could see the frustration in their eyes. Why was the situation spiraling like this? The tall officer took the lead, politely asking for everyone's version of events. Karen launched into a tirade, labeling my guests as troublemakers, outsiders who refused to follow the shower rule, and insinuating they might be damaging community property. Her voice had that self-righteous quaver that tends to sway people who don't know better. The second officer approached the men, scanning them with a discerning gaze. Jason explained in a measured tone, "We're guests of the homeowner here. We followed the rules. We're not here to cause problems." Manny even offered to open the cooler to show there was nothing but bottled water, no alcohol, no glass. Vince quietly added that they had each served as Navy SEALs, which might have triggered Karen's animosity for reasons unknown. The officers exchanged glances. One officer asked me directly, "MAAM, is it true these 3 are your guests?" I nodded vigorously, providing my name and confirming my home address. I pointed out that the HOA rules permit residents to bring up to 4 guests. Karen, however, interjected, brandishing a printed copy of what she called the official regulations. She waved them around like evidence of a heinous crime. The officer took the papers, scanned them, and raised an eyebrow. At that moment, I detected a shift in the dynamic. The officer seemed unimpressed by Karen's claims. Tension still simmered. Karen tried to talk over everyone, but the officer held up a hand to silence her. The shorter officer approached her, presumably to get her side of the story more calmly. Meanwhile, the tall officer took Manny aside for a quick word, verifying IDs. Manny politely complied. Everyone's hearts pounded in unison, though no one said it aloud. Then an unexpected twist. Another neighbor emerged, a man named Marcus, someone who often jogged around the neighborhood at the same early hour as Karen. From behind the fence, he shouted that Karen had been targeting various homeowners for weeks, looking for any tiny pretext to report them. He claimed she'd once scolded him for not having authorized footwear at the pool, whatever that meant. He also mentioned she'd threatened to call the health department on a teenage lifeguard for having a bad attitude. The more he spoke, the more heads nodded among onlookers. It was the first time I'd seen people stand up en masse against Karen's reign of terror. Their voices lent credibility to our side, and I could see the officers' expressions soften. Karen, though, was livid, turning red and sputtering that everyone is against her and that she's just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. The police officers finally called for quiet. It was surreal to watch them mediating what should have been a simple community disagreement. One of the officers handed Karen back her printed HOA regulations, pointing out that she had misunderstood the guest rule. He then politely but firmly told her that calling the police for a non-emergency was inappropriate and could carry consequences. Karen's eyes widened, her lips thinning into a taut line. But the tension was about to escalate even further. Out of nowhere, the gate slammed open again, and a man with a camera stepped in reporter style. Apparently, he was a local blogger who had been tipped off by a neighbor about the meltdown in progress. There was something about the presence of a camera that raised the stakes in an instant. Karen's eyes flickered with fear and defiance all at once. The blogger introduced himself as Eddie, from a local YouTube channel that documented neighborhood conflicts, suburban drama uncensored, he called it. He circled the scene, capturing footage of the 2 squad cars, the shell-shocked neighbors, and the 3 men wearing wet swim trunks. Karen tried to shield her face with the clipboard, but it was too late. Eddie asked her if she wanted to give a statement. She barked at him to leave the private property. The police officers exchanged silent looks. They seemed exhausted, as though they'd wandered into a carnival sideshow. One officer sighed audibly before approaching Eddie, politely suggesting he film from the public sidewalk if he insisted on filming. Eddie nodded but didn't leave completely. Instead, he positioned himself just beyond the fence, lens trained on Karen's every move. Jason, Manny, and Vince resumed a calm demeanor, though it was clear they were uneasy about being filmed. Their time in service had taught them to avoid the spotlight, but they also recognized the moment. Manny muttered under his breath that at least this footage might show the truth if Karen tried to twist the story further. Meanwhile, Karen hovered near the officers, ranting about trespassers who lied about being Navy SEALs. A hush fell when Manny, evidently fed up, flipped open his wallet to reveal a special token, an insignia from the Naval Special Warfare community. It was subtle, not an official ID card, but enough to verify his background. The officers gave it a glance, nodded, and politely returned it. Karen, however, glared at Manny like he had just cast some dark spell. Then came a bizarre escalation. Karen pivoted to demand the men pay a guest fee, claiming the HOA had instituted one last month. Neither I nor any of the neighbors had heard of such a fee. The officers asked Karen to show official documentation. Flustered, she fumbled with her clipboard, flipping through pages of community guidelines. Nothing about a guest fee. Yet she kept insisting it existed, accusing us of deliberately withholding payments. The officers at this point had reached their limit. With a measured calm, the tall officer reminded Karen that false charges and repeated calls to the police for non-emergencies could land her in legal hot water. This was the 2nd or 3rd time he'd hinted at consequences. Karen finally quieted down. For a moment, I almost believed the situation would de-escalate gracefully. But deep inside, I had a hunch that we'd only seen the tip of the iceberg. The police wrapped up their visit by clearly stating there was no crime in progress, no threat, and no valid reason for them to remain. They politely told Karen that if she continued to file baseless complaints, she risked facing penalties herself. Karen stood with her mouth parted in shock, as though no one had ever dared speak to her that way. The neighbors, watching from the sidelines, breathed a collective sigh of relief as the officers departed. Eddie, the local blogger, captured the entire incident on camera, a detail that would prove significant later. As the squad cars pulled away, the tension did not entirely dissipate. Karen shot me and my guests a final glare so frosty it could have frozen the pool solid. Then, in a huff, She stomped off, muttering under her breath. For the next few days, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors who had witnessed or heard about the pool incident. It became a hot topic. People whispered about Karen's meltdown, the presence of the police, and the identity of my 3 Navy SEAL guests. The atmosphere in the neighborhood felt charged with an odd mix of relief. Someone had stood up to Karen in apprehension. Everyone wondered what her next move would be. Rumor had it that she was emailing the HOA board daily, complaining about security threats at the pool. Meanwhile, Jason, Manny, and Vince tried to shrug off the drama. They left for a few days to check out other parts of the state, but Manny promised to return later in the week to wrap up some personal errands before heading home. I tried to brace myself for more unexpected showdowns. On Wednesday evening, I was preparing dinner when my phone rang. The screen showed Manny's name. I picked up to hear him sound breathless, explaining that something bizarre was happening at the pool again. Apparently, Karen had chained the gates shut. A new, heavily laminated sign spelled out in giant letters, "Pool closed until further notice. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Manny and a few other residents stood outside, baffled. The pool was supposed to be a communal area regulated by the HOA board. Karen had taken matters into her own hands. My pulse spiked. This was beyond petty. It was sabotage. No single homeowner was allowed to unilaterally close the pool. Manny asked if I had the contact info for the board. We decided to meet at the pool gate in half an hour, gather evidence, and alert the board. Part of me quivered with a mix of anger and excitement. This was about to become a showdown of epic proportions. By the time I arrived, Manny was there with several other concerned residents. The chain clamped around the fence was solid, with a hefty padlock. On the sign, Karen had scrawled her signature in thick black marker. It was borderline comical, if it wasn't so infuriating. Children looked on in disappointment, their parents confused about how to explain this nonsense. Determined to keep things civil, Manny urged everyone to document the chain, the sign, and the lock gate with photos. Meanwhile, a middle-aged father named Glenn took it upon himself to call the HOA president, Martha Jacobs, who had a reputation for fairness and no-nonsense leadership. Thankfully, Martha picked up, and Glenn put the call on speakerphone so we could all hear. She was appalled. She promised to be there in 15 minutes, her voice laced with annoyance and an undercurrent of determination. Sure enough, a sleek black SUV pulled up shortly. Out stepped Martha Jacobs, impeccably dressed in a crisp blouse and slacks. She had a commanding air about her, stern yet approachable. With swift efficiency, she took in the situation, the padlock, the sign, the gathered residents. "This is unacceptable," she declared. From the corner of my eye, I spotted Karen lurking behind a row of hedges, watching the commotion. Martha produced a master key ring for community facilities. She tried several keys, none of which fit the brand new padlock Karen had installed. That's when a hush fell over the small crowd. Martha instructed Glenn to call a locksmith immediately. Karen emerged, arms folded defiantly. "What you're doing is in violation of multiple HOA bylaws," Martha told Karen, voice tight but controlled. Karen snapped back, claiming that she was acting for public safety. She spouted something about unknown men invading the pool, ignoring community rules, and putting everyone at risk. Martha stood her ground. "You do not have the authority to close down or lock the community pool. That power rests solely with the board and only under serious health or safety concerns." Karen waved her clipboard like a magic wand again, but the spell had broken. The crowd behind Martha stood quietly, many with arms crossed, supporting the HOA president. We all waited, tension coiling like a loaded spring. Karen refused to budge, insisted the chain stay, and threatened to call the police yet again. Martha gave a flat stare, as though daring her to make that call. 10 minutes later, the locksmith arrived. With the precision of a professional, he examined the chain and padlock, asked who had installed it, and upon receiving an answer that pointed to Karen, took out his tools. Karen's face grew red, and she hollered that this was destruction of her personal property. Martha calmly explained that the padlock was illegally placed on community property. The locksmith, shrugging, snipped the chain and removed the lock in a matter of seconds. The chain clanked heavily on the concrete. The sign fluttered to the ground, no longer relevant. Karen stood to the side, lips pursed in fury. The moment was thick with significance. She had overstepped in a way that was visible to everyone, and she had been definitively overruled by the board itself. That sense of karmic justice tingled in the air, but it wasn't quite complete, not yet. Martha addressed the gathered residents. "Ladies and gentlemen, the pool is now open again. Please enjoy responsibly." Then, turning to Karen, she stated, "I'm going to schedule an immediate board meeting to discuss your conduct. You should expect a formal notice." Karen's mouth twisted. She tried to stammer out a defense, claiming I and my mystery guests started all this trouble. One by one, residents spoke up, contradicting her. They recounted her harassment, her intimidation, her baseless reports to the police. In that moment, Karen realized she was outnumbered. Her gaze flicked from face to face, searching for an ally. She found none. With a final huff, she spun on her heels and marched away, clutching her clipboard like a life preserver. Despite the apparent victory, an unsettling mood hung in the air. We all knew Karen wasn't the type to back down so easily. That night, Manny and I chatted on my back porch, sipping iced tea. He voiced what we were all thinking. Karen's meltdown was part of a deeper obsession with control. She seemed unwilling to relinquish her self-appointed authority, and this fiasco likely wouldn't be the end. Just as Manny was leaving, his phone buzzed. It was Vince, sending a link to a new YouTube video from Eddie, the local blogger, who'd recorded the police encounter at the pool. Manny pressed play, and we watched, wide-eyed, as the events of that day unfolded on screen. Karen's angry face, the police arrival, Manny explaining his background, neighbors stepping forward. Eddie had edited the video with dramatic flair, highlighting each of Karen's contradictions. Even more surprising, the video was already gaining traction online, with dozens of comments condemning her behavior. We exchanged looks, half amused, half concerned. Sometimes, the internet had a way of giving situations a life of their own. By the next morning, rumors swirled that Karen had caught wind of the YouTube video and was absolutely seething. Another neighbor, Shannon, texted me about an unconfirmed report that Karen was threatening to sue Eddie for defamation. I asked Manny if he knew anything. He rolled his eyes, saying that defamation suits rarely went anywhere without legitimate cause, and Karen had none. Still, the possibility of legal threats added another layer of tension to the neighborhood. Karen's vendetta was turning into a spectacle, and we all felt the undercurrent of chaos. Meanwhile, the HOA board sent out an official email announcing an emergency meeting to discuss recent events concerning the pool. The meeting was set for Friday evening at the community clubhouse. A wave of anticipation rippled through the residents. Would Karen be reprimanded? Would there be consequences for her actions? Friday arrived. I made my way to the small, beige-painted community clubhouse with Manny by my side. He was due to leave town soon, but he stayed specifically to see this drama through. The parking lot was packed with cars, a rare sight for an HOA meeting. Inside, residents filled rows of folding chairs. At the front sat the 5-member board, including Martha. Karen was conspicuously absent at first, but a few minutes before the meeting began, she entered from a side door, head held high. Martha opened the meeting with standard procedural announcements, but everyone could sense the tension. When the topic shifted to unilateral closure of shared amenities, the crowd collectively leaned forward. Martha read aloud a prepared statement detailing the complaint against Karen. It cited the chain on the pool gate, the unauthorized sign, and the previous incidents where she'd falsely involved the police. My pulse throbbed as I watched Karen's stony face in the front row. The floor opened for discussion. Several neighbors rose to speak. Some described how Karen's incessant monitoring had frightened their children. Others shared that she had bullied them about trivial things, yard decorations, mailboxes, the color of their front doors. One older gentleman recounted how she left him a threatening note for putting a bird feeder in his backyard, claiming it attracted unapproved wildlife. But the biggest bombshell came when Glenn, the father who called Martha that day, revealed he had filed a formal complaint after Karen verbally harassed his teen daughter for wearing a too bright swimsuit. Another resident chimed in, referencing security footage from the pool area. The avalanche of testimonies was staggering. Karen sat rigid, as if physically pinned down by the rising tide of grievances. Finally, Martha spoke. Given the numerous accounts and documented actions, the board must decide on disciplinary measures. She indicated that Karen might face suspension of HOA privileges, fines, or even a legal order, preventing her from interfering with community facilities. Karen leapt to her feet, spitting out accusations that we were all conspiring against her. In a trembling voice, she blamed me for bringing suspicious men into our pool, rehashed the claim of danger, and insisted she was only protecting the neighborhood. Nobody was buying it. Manny calmly walked to the front, introduced himself as Manny Rivera, a retired Navy SEAL petty officer first class, and stated he was prepared to file a restraining order if Karen continued to harass him or me. That seemed to knock the last shred of bluster from Karen's sails. The threat of legal consequences left her visibly shaken. She slumped back into her seat as Manny's words reverberated through the silent room. One by one, the board members voted on the disciplinary measures. The final decision: Karen would be fined a significant amount for installing an unauthorized lock and sign, and she would lose her access key to the pool for 3 months. Any further acts of harassment could lead to more severe legal repercussions. The tension snapped as the crowd erupted into hushed murmurs of relief. Karen stared at the board, stunned. Then her eyes swept across the room, landing on me, Manny, the neighbors who had spoken against her, even the blogger Eddie, who stood at the back with his camera. She said nothing. Finally, she gathered her belongings and stormed out, letting the heavy metal door slam behind her. A sense of finality wafted through the air. Justice, or at least a taste of it, had been served. In the aftermath of the meeting, the neighborhood buzzed with cautious optimism. For so long, Karen had terrorized people with her relentless meddling. But now, collectively, we dismantled her ability to dictate every aspect of our lives. Manny and I grabbed a late dinner with a few neighbors, celebrating the new era of sanity we hoped would prevail. The conversation drifted to everyday pleasantries: work, hobbies, weekend plans. The intensity of the last few days finally began to ebb, replaced by a sense of unity. It was as if the community had discovered its voice by standing up to a bully. That weekend, the pool hummed with activity, families splashing, children laughing, residents chatting amiably. Karen was nowhere to be seen, her key privileges revoked. Though a few neighbors pitied her for the public humiliation, most agreed she'd brought it upon herself with repeated acts of petty aggression. The hum of normalcy, ironically, felt more dramatic in its contrast to the chaos we had just endured. With Karen's authority cut down to size, Manny and his SEAL buddies packed up to continue their journey, satisfied that the situation was resolved. Before leaving, Manny and I strolled around the neighborhood one last time. He noted how peaceful it felt, without the looming specter of someone peering from behind curtains, ready to pounce on any perceived misstep. As we passed by the now unlocked pool gate, a sense of triumph warmed my chest. We had faced a tyrant of triviality and emerged victorious. Manny paused, reflecting on how important it is to fight back against injustice, even when it masquerades as concerned citizenship. Standing there, I realized that what felt like a petty suburban skirmish had actually tested our resolve, drawing out the best in neighbors and forging friendships under fire. News traveled fast. Eddie's YouTube video capturing Karen's meltdown soared in views, drawing in outsiders curious about the HOA Karen fiasco. While some might have seen it purely as entertainment, We in the neighborhood felt it represented something deeper. It showed the importance of calling out abuses of power, no matter how small or local. It also reminded us of the power of unity. Once we spoke out, her reign ended almost immediately. By the time Manny loaded his bags into his SUV, the atmosphere in the neighborhood felt lighter, unshackled from paranoia. If Karen had any plans to retaliate, they were effectively halted by the board's sanctions. The swirling tension was gone, replaced by the sweet relief of normalcy and a subtle hum of camaraderie among us all. A few final reverberations cemented the karmic arc of it all. The board followed through with the fine, garnishing it against Karen's HOA dues. Word spread that Karen tried to appeal, but she was turned down unanimously. Meanwhile, her forced hiatus from community amenities meant she had no official standing to police them. If she tried to confront anyone near the pool or tennis courts, they had every right to report her behavior again. Days rolled into weeks, and the summer drifted toward a mellow close. As for the legacy of that fateful day, when Navy SEALs dove into the pool, well, no one around here would soon forget it. The story of how Karen had frozen with indecision and fury, only to be exposed by her own pettiness, became a neighborhood legend, cautionary yet comical, a reminder that sometimes karmic retribution arrives in the most unexpected ways. There was one final twist that arrived by mail one sunny afternoon. I found an envelope addressed to me with a return label from the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Inside was a letter of thanks, penned by Manny's commanding officer from when Manny was active duty. Apparently, Manny had shared the story of our little suburban showdown. In the letter, the officer commended the community for recognizing Manny and his friends not as intruders, but as honored guests who simply wanted to relax in peace. He wrote that it was often the small battles that test character. I tucked the letter away, heart warmed by this unexpected recognition. Looking back, it became clear how fate had orchestrated an event that was both trivial and monumental. All the petty details, HOA rules, pink jogging suits, laminated signs led up to a confrontation that revealed truths about power and community. And in that revelation, Karen's iron fist crumbled under the weight of her own arrogance. And that, my friends, is how one everyday HOA feud spiraled into a clash involving locked gates, unshakable Navy SEALs, and a tyrant who learned what happens when righteous neighbors band together. A simple swim turned into a life lesson for the entire community. Petty power is powerless against the collective will to stand up for fairness. If you've enjoyed hearing how karmic justice found its mark in our unsuspecting little suburb, be sure to like this video and share it with anyone who's ever tussled with an overzealous HOA. And of course, subscribe for more stories that prove even the most ordinary settings can yield the most extraordinary twists. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.